Welcome to Project Lekut Siches. We're going to be learning today the Sikha Beis of Parshas Haazinu on page 148 in Chelek Yudalit. This Sikha is about Birchas HaTorah, and one of the main things that Rabbi discusses is the Birchas HaTorah as it relates to women, and also in general. And there's other things that come into the Sikha. The subject of Hesach Hadas and Tefillin is a big subject in the Sikha. And some of the Sikha is sort of a hashlama to a Sikha that we learned before in Parshas Va'aschanan, also about Birchas HaTorah. Isa b'Gemara. Minayin leBirchas HaTorah lefanea min HaTorah. How do I know that before one learns Torah, he has to make a Birchas HaTorah? Shenemar, it says in this week's Parsha, Kishem Hashem Ekra Hovu Goydel Lalikeinu. You call Hashem's name, which refers to learning Torah, so you have to express Hashem's greatness by making a bracha. So this is the source of Birchas HaTorah. The fact that the Gemara brings a separate and special source for Birchas HaTorah, seemingly learning Torah is a mitzvah just like any other mitzvah, and it should be included in the general takon of Chazal to make a bracha on mitzvahs. Mashma, the Birchas HaTorah zu shoyne mi Birchas HaMitzvahs. This Birchas HaTorah we're talking about here, which is the Birchas HaTorah vasher b'chabonim mikol ha'amim v'nasa lanu es teirasai, is different than all Birchas HaMitzvahs. What's the difference? The difference is the Birchas HaMitzvahs hi hoidol HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Hashem mekadosh yisona b'mitzvaysav. All Birchas HaMitzvahs, what is the bracha on? The bracha is to thank the Eibishter for sanctifying us with fulfilling these mitzvahs. The Eibishter gave us this obligation, and with this he sanctified us, and the mitzvah has a tremendous impact on the person that fulfills the mitzvah. So the bracha is not that the very act of the mitzvah itself necessitates a bracha. The act itself doesn't require a bracha. We're thanking the Eibishter for the kedusha that the mitzvah brings the person, the chiyuv that we have to do this mitzvah. That's all Birchas HaMitzvahs. V'ilu Birchas HaTorah hi bracha al etzem limud HaTorah. The bracha of Birchas HaTorah, the very act of learning Torah, requires a bracha. Regardless of whether you're fulfilling something with this learning, you're not fulfilling, whether you have an obligation, whether you don't, the very act of learning Torah necessitates a bracha. Mulvad kiyama mitzvah shebizeh. Besides the fact that learning also is a fulfillment of a mitzvah, and because of that, you need a bracha for the mitzvah aspect of your learning. As the Rabbi brings there in the Ha'ara, there is the bracha shekeshana b'mitzvaysiv tzivano al divrei Torah. But here we're discussing the bracha of Ashabacha Bana Mikol Ha'amim. That's a different bracha, and a unique bracha only for limud Torah. The very exercise of learning Torah requires a bracha for this learning. It's a different nusach. There's a different lashon in the bracha. It's not a shekeshana b'mitzvaysav, thanking the Eibishter for sanctifying us through a mitzvah, giving us the opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. It's ashabacham b'anim v'kolamim v'nasa lanu es teirasai. If I learn Torah, the very learning itself requires to make a bracha to thank the Eibishter for giving me this Torah. That's the special chiddush that we learn out over here. Shem Hashem Ekra. You're learning Torah, you're calling Hashem's name, you're reading Hashem's name in the learning of Torah, which is in all of Torah. Hava Goydel Lalikeinu. That itself requires that you make a bracha. So too it's mashma dal Tereb Shulchan Aruch. Ulechein yira kol adam shetia kli chemdasei shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shehaya mishtasheh ba v'chol yom. The Eibishter's kli chemda, the Eibishter's utensil of pleasure, special utensil, which is the Torah. The Eibishter would have pleasure with this every day. And this is what the Eibishter gave us. Chashuva be'einav, it should be very important in your eyes. Levarach aleh b'simcha, yaisim me'al kol hanoah shebaylam. Make a bracha on it with a tremendous joy, more than any other pleasures of the world. So what do you see here? What's the bracha that you're making here on? You're making a bracha on a fulfillment of something, and a fulfillment of a mitzvah, or of a certain kedusha, that you're thanking the Eibishter for giving us a kedusha through the Torah. It's not what the Alter Rebbe says. The mizeh mashma, It's mashma from what the Alter Rebbe is saying here. Shahabrachi al etzem inyan atayre shenasan lanu HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Al derech birchas hanenin. The bracha of birchas hatayre is the very Torah that we have, that the Eibishter gives us to learn. Regardless of whether the learning is a mitzvah, not a mitzvah, the very act of learning Torah that the Eibishter gave us this Torah to learn requires a bracha. When you come to learn Torah, it requires a bracha to thank the Eibishter for the great simcha of the fact that the Eibishter gave us and that we received this Torah. And the Rebbe says this is similar to birchas hanenin. Birchas hanenin, you're making a bracha on the hana of the food. Similar here, you're making a bracha on the very limud Torah itself. The limud Torah requires a bracha. The Rebbe says it's al derech birchas hanenin. In the ha'ara here, there's a big arichis why it's not exactly like birchas hanenin. It's only al derech birchas hanenin. It's different. Over there, it's for the actual hana. And some say that it's the same with learning. When a person learns and understands and digests the words of Torah and comprehends the words of Torah, there's a hana on that, and that's the bracha. But that's not what the Rebbe means here. Here, it's the learning of Torah. We thank the Eibishter for giving us this Torah, and for the fact that we received this Torah that He gave us. That's what the bracha is on. And that's the very act of learning Torah requires this bracha to thank the Eibishter for giving us this Torah. Unlike all other mitzvahs. It's a unique, special bracha that we learn out from another pasuk. So now, the Rebbe brings here what it says regarding women and learning Torah. Women also make a birchas Torah. Why? Because they also have to learn Torah to know their mitzvahs that they're obligated in. To know how to fulfill them. To know how to be careful regarding the loises, which they're obligated just like men. So this is the reason why they make a birchas Torah. So the Rabbi has a question here. But based on what we just said, the birchas The birchas Torah is not because of the mitzvah that is an obligation that the Eibishter gave us to do a mitzvah in order to sanctify us. That's not what it's about. Rather, al etzem inyan the Talmud Torah, the very inyan of learning Torah. When a person learns Torah, that itself requires a bracha, whether it's a mitzvah or not. The Torah is so precious and so great, and it's such a gift that the very learning of the Torah itself requires a bracha. So, even if women are not obligated to learn Torah, because they have to know how to fulfill their mitzvahs, they still should be obligated to make the bracha of birchas Torah. What it brings in the Gemara, the pasuk Shem Hashem Ekra Hava Goydel Alekenu, that you learn words of Torah, that itself necessitates a bracha, whether it's a mitzvah, whether it's not, whether you have to have the knowledge to know that you're going to be able to fulfill mitzvahs through what you're learning here. None of that matters. The very act of learning a Torah itself necessitates a bracha. So why isn't that enough of a reason for women to be chayiv in birchas Torah? Why is the Alter Rebbe bringing the reason that they're required to learn Torah because of their mitzvahs? Yuvan bahaktim kushya. So we'll answer this by first bringing up another question. And here the Rebbe is going to get into a lengthy discussion regarding the subject of hesach hadas regarding the bracha of limud Torah, hesach hadas regarding tefillin, different aspects of hesach hadas regarding tefillin, and then the Rebbe later on will come back and explain regarding women why the Alter Rebbe brings this reason. So let's see. Now, seemingly, there shouldn't be a set time when we make the birchas Torah every morning. Ella rather, every time a person comes and is accessing this gift and he's putting it to use, he's learning this Torah that the Eibishter gave him, so you should have to make a birchas Torah then. The act of limud Torah is mechayev a person to thank Hashem for this gift that we received from the Eibishter. So why don't we make a bracha every time we go and learn Torah? Or perhaps there would be a svara to say differently. Based on what we explained, that the bracha of birchas Torah is not thanking the Eibishter for the opportunity to fulfill my chiyuv, the sanctity that I'm gaining through the mitzvah, but we're thanking the Eibishter for this great gift that He gave us. So maybe it would be enough a person makes this bracha once in his lifetime. Once in his lifetime he thanks the Eibishter for this gift, the great simcha that we have of this gift that the Eibishter gave us. Or maybe once a year you should make this bracha. The Rebbe brings that you find by the mitzvah of the Zachar es Ashasalacha Malik, that the memory of that Zachar is from one year to the next. So maybe we can apply a similar concept to Limud HaTorah, that the bracha for 1 year lasts for the entire year, and then the next year you make a new bracha. Omdam la'alacha nifsak, the bechlal, mevarach adam birchas HaTorah rak pa'amachas lefnei alimud betchilas hayom, that you make a bracha once in the morning before you learn. V'zeh oila leila limude kol hayom, and this bracha is for all the learning the entire day, va'afila hifsik b'emtza, with whatever interruptions a person makes during the day. That one bracha in the beginning of the day goes on any time he learns Torah the rest of the day, regardless of any interruptions. So what's the pshat in this? Kosav Admar Zokin, so the Alter Rebbe explains, L'deya achas, according to one opinion, as follows. Imu adam, sheraga lulmud, v'af k'sheyotze l'sasek b'parnasasem, imayr lasses tzrochav. So we're talking about a person that's accustomed to learning Torah, and even when he goes out to his parnasa, he does what he has to do as quickly as possible, in order to go back to learn. So the fact that he's going out to work is not an interruption. When he's working, in his mind, he's planning and thinking that he wants to go back to learn Torah. So that's not an interruption. So the bracha that he made in the morning when he learned will go on the learning that he does later after he's finished with his business. The same also applies to a person that goes into a bathhouse. He doesn't take his mind off of the fact that he's going to return to learning afterwards. Same is true even if a person goes to sleep. A temporary sleep. It's not considered to be a hefsik because he's planning on coming back to learn. If a person sleeps a permanent sleep, a longer sleep, chashuva hefsik. That is considered to be a hefsik. That's one opinion. The Alter Rebbe does bring a second opinion as well. V'yesh oimrim shebirchas HaTorah hi kebirchas HaShachar. Birchas HaTorah, the way Chazal established this bracha, is that it's only said once a day. Like all the birchas HaShachar, which were put in the beginning of the day. Shaletik noisa lepa machas bayom v'chein nagel. This is a bracha Chazal established in the morning, regardless of what happens throughout the day. Any interruptions, including, according to this opinion, if a person sleeps a shinas kva, interruptions don't matter. L'chatchila, the whole takana of this bracha was like Birchas HaShachar, which is just said in the morning, never again during the day. And v'chein nagu, that's the minig b'payil, that we never make the bracha again, regardless of what kind of interruptions the person makes later in the day. This second opinion that Rabbi here is bringing very bekitzer, and it will be discussed in the last Eis of the Sikha. But for now, the Rebbe is going to discuss the first opinion that Alter Rebbe explains here, that the person has it in his mind to return to learning, so therefore even if he goes into a merchatz or a beis hakisei, it doesn't matter. It's not considered to be a hefsek in his learning, and therefore he can continue learning afterwards and without a new bracha. So the Rebbe asks a question, v'tzarech lahavin, b'negei letfilin, Pasak Admor Zokin. So regarding tefillin, the Alter Rebbe tells us. Also, similar halacha, you make one bracha when you put on tefillin. Now, if a person had to remove his tefillin, he had to use the bathroom, or he went into a merchatz, what happens now? Does he have to make a new bracha on his tefillin? So what does Alter Rebbe say? Misha chalatz es tefillov, v'hoye bedaite. And he had in mind that he's going to put it back on. In b'shas chalitzas at tefillin, hoye daite lachzar lanichan miyad. He took off your tefillin for whatever reason, and you had in mind that you're going to put it on again immediately, and you put it on again. You don't have to make any new bracha. But if you needed to use the bathroom in between, at that time, he's not allowed to wear his tefillin. The fact that the person is planning to come back and put his tefillin back on, that intention is not effective at all. And when the person comes out of the bathroom, now he has to put on the tefillin and make a new bracha. He was in a place where he wasn't allowed to put on tefillin, so his das doesn't matter. That's the halacha by tefillin. So now the question is, l'chayre ma'ishno mi birchas ha-Torah. So what's the difference from birchas ha-Torah? Sheposa kan the merchatz ubeis hakisei lo yave hefsek v'esach hadas. Regarding birchas ha-Torah, the fact that a person interrupted his learning and went into a merchatz or a beis hakisei, that's not an interruption. Whereas now the Rebbe brings, whereas when it comes to tefillin, going into a merchatz or beis hakisei is a hefsek. So what's the difference here between Torah and tefillin? So the Rebbe brings here again the second opinion. It's they hold that even if a person sleeps a permanent sleep, you still don't have to make a bracha again. It's not because they hold that that is not considered to be a hefsek. A permanent sleep is definitely considered to be a hefsek. According to the second opinion, an interruption doesn't even matter. Birchas ha-Torah was established like Birchas ha-Shachar in the morning, one bracha for the whole day, regardless of whatever hefsek does take place. So that's a different opinion. We're not discussing that right now. So our question over here is, what's the difference between the concept of Hesach Hadas, the way it is by Birchas ha-Torah, that even if you go into a bathroom, into a beis hakisei, to a merchatz, where you can't learn Torah, it's not considered to be a hefsek, and when it comes to tefillin, it is. The tefillin shana lefisha b'tefillin Oster shir menachan olav beis hakisei chulum. Now we can't say that by tefillin the reason why it's a hefsek because if you go into a place Oster tzrachov, so over there the tefillin is not allowed to be on you. So over there that's a hefsek when you're in a place where you're not allowed to wear the tefillin. Says the Rebbe, that's not Shari Gam Talmud Torah Dina Kain. The exact same halacha applies to Torah. Ukipsakat Marazakin, as the Alter Rebbe paskins, Kol in Yishu Midivrei HaKodesh, Asul Ha'oimra Bebeis HaKisei Bebeis HaMerchetz. Any words of Kodesh, of Torah, you're not allowed to say in the bathroom, or in a shower, or in a Bebeis HaMerchetz. Afilu Lahar Beliboy Asa Afilu B'divrei Torah Chulu. Even thinking words of Torah are not allowed. So the same interruption, because of the isser of not being allowed to put on tefillin when you're in the bathroom, is also regarding Torah. So what is the distinction between the two? So, before the Rebbe answers this question, the Rebbe broadens the idea here and brings up that there's another case of Hesach Hadas regarding tefillin. Let's take a closer look and see another halacha b'negei to the Hesach Hadas by tefillin. There's a unique halacha regarding tefillin. That while you're wearing the tefillin, you're not allowed to take your mind off the tefillin. The kosav admar azakin Oster la'asiyach daite ma tefillin kavachaymer mitzitz. Person should not take his mind off the tefillin, and we learned this out with a kavachaymer from the tzitz. And the kavachaymer is the tzitz only has the Eibish's name mentioned once. The tefillin has the Eibish's name mentioned numerous times. So if regarding the tzitz, you're not allowed to take your mind off it. For sure, the same should be true regarding tefillin. Then the Alter Rebbe explains, if a person is b'schaik, laughter or frivolous behavior, that's what's called Hesach Hadas. You took your mind off the tefillin. But if a person is not with b'schaik or kalas reish, that doesn't count as a Hesach Hadas. Avo, k'sha'oimid b'yireh u'mis'asik b'tzrachav. Person stands with a proper awe. He's doing what he needs to. He's occupied with something. He's not literally thinking about the tefillin. That's not called Hesach Hadas of the tefillin. It would be it's a much better mitzvah that you shouldn't take your mind off the tefillin at all. But as far as the halacha of what we learn out from the tzitz, it's not required. As long as there's no schaik and kalas reish, it's okay. So the Rebbe says, l'chayr ein move on. This is not understood. Yisoid ha'isru kanal kavachayim mitzitz ma tzitz amre teire v'haya mitzchayt tomich le'esiach daita mimena tefillin chul alachas kama v'kama. The source of the concept not to take your mind off the tefillin is learned from the tzitz. So v'lama lo yikara hesach hadas rak sha'oimid b'schayk kalas reish. Why would Hesach Hadas only mean if the schaik and kalas reish? If you're occupied with something else, but if your mind is not on the tefillin, you're occupied with other things, but there's no schaik and kalas reish, that's not called Hesach Hadas. Why not? So really the Rebbe is asking here two questions. First of all, We learn it out from the tzitz. Why should it be any different than the tzitz? By the tzitz, the halacha is literally you shouldn't be masiach das from the tzitz all the time. Not just not to have schayk and kalas reish. And also, if the concept is not to be masiach das, so then why does that only require not schayk and kalas reish? Not to be masiach das means to have your mind on the tefillin. So how are we fulfilling that if the person is occupied with something else? Now, we would be able to answer as follows. According to this opinion that the Alter Rebbe brings here, says the Rebbe points out in the Ha'ara, there's a machlokes rishonim about this, the Rambam disagrees with this, but according to this opinion that the Rebbe brings here, that the Alter Rebbe brings here, din hesach hadas b'tfilin eino shelo yasiach daita kipshutai. The whole halacha is not the way it sounds literally, don't take your mind off the tefillin. That's not the pshat. The whole requirement in the first place is Hesach liktzea hafchi desimes das. Hesach hadas means you're taking your mind to something that's away from tefillin, opposite of tefillin. Tefillin requires yireh. Tefillin requires the Eibish's name in the tefillin and to be aware of the tefillin. Hesach hadas means not that your mind is off the tefillin, but you put your mind into something opposite of the tefillin. That's what hesach hadas here means. Kagayin schayk and kalas reish shein bezayin la tefillin shalav. So what happens then is, if it's something that's opposite of what the tefillin is, the issue is that there's a bezayin, there's an embarrassment of the tefillin. So there's no positive halacha that you have to have your mind on the tefillin constantly. The main point here, the whole halacha of hesach hadas in the first place, the definition of this halacha is, don't put your mind in something which will embarrass the tefillin. So you're putting your mind into something that's opposite of the kavod of the tefillin that it deserves. The issue is not taking your mind off the tefillin. So therefore, it's not a question. Why is this only hesach hadas? This is the definition of the hesach hadas regarding the tefillin. It's not about keeping your mind on the tefillin all the time. It's about doing something which will be embarrassing to the tefillin, which is only schayk and kalas reish. We can't explain the Alter Rebbe's opinion to be this way. So first of all, the Rebbe says, the question over here was, we're learning it out from tzitz. There's a kavachayim from tzitz. And that kavachayim says that you actually should be putting your mind all the time to the tefillin like the tzitz. Not just an issue of not embarrassing the tefillin. The kavachayim of tzitz does say that you have to have your mind on the tefillin. So that we're not answering. If that's the kavachayim, so then why is the issue only schayk and kalas reish? But besides that, in the words of the Alter Rebbe, you see that you can't define the issue of hesach hadas that it's only about embarrassing the tefillin. Because at a case of the Alter Rebbe writes, Oster la siach daitei ma tefillin kol zman shein olav afile rega echad. A person should not take his mind off the tefillin, and the Alter Rebbe adds 3 words, even one moment. Sheine betur v'shulchan aruch. The Torah Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't say those words. Afile rega echad. Shemizeh mashma. From these words, it seems. She'inyan hesach hadas kan hu kipshutai. The idea of hesach hadas means literally shetehei daitoi mamel shalat tefillin, that a person should have his mind on the tefillin, v'layasiyach daitimen, not to take his mind off the tefillin, v'layrak lishlol kavana v'inyan hafchi. The definition of the requirement of not to be masiach das is not only when a person takes his mind to something which is opposite of tefillin, embarrassing to the tefillin. No, the Alter Rebbe says, don't be masiach das of the tefillin even for one moment. There's an active thing about having your attention on the tefillin. Positive point, not just a negative of not embarrassing the tefillin. So what's the pshat that at the same time the Alter Rebbe says that the issue of hesach hadas is only when there's schayk and kalas reish? So we need to examine a little bit deeper and understand this concept of hesach hadas. And that's what the Rebbe will do here. And when we have a deeper understanding of this concept of hesach hadas, we can't just take it in the literal sense, hesach hadas, I took my mind off the tefillin, that's hesach hadas. Obviously that's not the case. We see that you don't have to have your mind on the tefillin literally every moment. So once we'll have a deeper understanding about the concept of what hesach hadas means, the Rebbe will come back and apply that to Limudat Torah, why going into a merchatz and a beis hakisei are not a hesach hadas of the bracha that you made before you went into the beis hakisei. Let's see. So the explanation here is as follows. We're really discussing of it. Regarding tefillin, we're discussing two different halachas of Hesach Hadas. We're discussing the halacha of Hesach Hadas as far as the brach is concerned. That if you took off your tefillin and you had a mind to put it back on, you don't have to make a new bracha. But if you went into a place where you're not allowed to wear tefillin, then you do have to make a new bracha, because then your mind is off the tefillin. You're disconnected to the tefillin. That's one halacha of Hesach Hadas we're discussing. The other halacha of Hesach Hadas we're discussing is while you wear the tefillin. What exactly is the definition of that requirement while you're wearing the tefillin? So let's see. So the Rebbe divides this that it's really two halachas that are related to two different aspects of the mitzvah. They're not two halachas of Hesach Hadas. It's not only two halachas of Hesach Hadas that apply to two different time periods. One while you're wearing the tefillin, and one to see what happens if you take it off. Does your bracha still apply, or do you have to make a new bracha? It's really two different aspects of the mitzvah altogether. The mitzvah's tefillin yesh beis inyanim. There are two different inyanim in the mitzvah of tefillin. Aleph, hanachas tefillin. The act, the physical tefillin, you put on the tefillin, and the tefillin are there on your arm, on your head. That's one part of the mitzvah. Beis, kavanas mitzvah. There's also the kavana, what a person thinks about when he puts on the tefillin, the shabbat, chulu, to subjugate himself, haneshama shi b'maya chulu, to subjugate his neshama, which is in his brain, liboy, and his heart, which is, the Alter Rebbe brings this in Shulchan Aruch, and also in the Siddur, the kavana a person is supposed to have when he puts on the tefillin. Shegam zeh, and the Rebbe adds, shegam zeh hu chelek b'kiyum ha-mitzvah. This is a part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. In other words, the Rebbe is clarifying, this is not just some kind of a kavana regarding what the teichen of the mitzvah is about. It's actually a part of the mitzvah. As the Rebbe here brings, what it says in the Bach, this is an integral part of the mitzvah. There's the act of the mitzvah, having the tefillin on your arm, on your head, and then there's the kavanah of the mitzvah. So now, there's two different halachas of Hesach Hadas, one applying to the hanachas tefillin, and one applying to the kavanah mitzvah. So the Rabbi begins with the hanachas tefillin as far as the bracha. The bracha, you're making a bracha on the act of putting on your tefillin. And here, let's discuss whether that bracha will continue even after you take off the tefillin. What happens here? V'hinei gamim ein daitoi ala tefillin. Even if you're not consciously and actively thinking about your tefillin, ein ze begeder hesach hadas v'hefsik b'hanachas tefillin. This is not a hesach hadas. This is not that now you're not connected to the tefillin that's on you. If the tefillin is on you, even if your mind is not on that tefillin that's on you, however, the hanachas tefillin, the fact that you placed tefillin on you and you have the tefillin on you, that act of the mitzvah is continuing. It's there. It's still on you. You're connected to the mitzvah whether your mind is on it or not. As far as the physical act and the physical presence of the tefillin on your arm, whether your mind is on it or not, it doesn't change it. That mitzvah continues. He has the fulfillment of the mitzvah every moment that the tefillin is on him, whether his mind is on it or not. So as far as the actual presence of the tefillin on you, that continues regardless if your mind is on it or not. So the same applies also regarding the bracha. The bracha is on the act of putting on the tefillin. The bracha you make in the beginning of the mitzvah doesn't get interrupted if you're not consciously thinking about the tefillin, as long as the tefillin is on you. That mitzvah is continuing. The fulfillment of the mitzvah is continuing uninterrupted. When a person takes off the tefillin, you took off the tefillin. Your bracha was on putting the tefillin on you, on the tefillin being on you. You took it off, so now that bracha you made on the physical tefillin being on you, so it's not there anymore. So you don't have that connection to the mitzvah. You're not related to this fulfillment of the mitzvah anymore. If you're going to put it back on, you're going to have to make a bracha again. Your connection to the act of the mitzvah, of it being on you, was interrupted. If, while you're physically removing the tefillin, you're removing it with the intention to put it back on, so then, although the tefillin is not physically on you, however, because while you're taking it off with the intention to put it back on, so that's not an interruption. You're still connected to the mitzvah, you're still connected to the first mitzvah that you did where you made a bracha. So the bracha will go on the tefillin that you'll put back on because you l'chatchila planned on putting it back on. You were never disconnected to the act of the mitzvah. Another detail here. Another point. If a person plans on putting back on the tefillin, a person's in the bathroom before he puts it back on again. When he's in the bathroom, he can't put on the tefillin. The fact that he plans and he wants to put it back on will not help. So we need there to be a continuation to the bracha that you made on the first act of the mitzvah when you put it on. You have to be in a condition that your mind that you have, the plan that you have to put it back on is actually possible at every single moment to put it on. So then your connection to the first act of the mitzvah is never interrupted. Because even when you take it off, you plan on putting it on, and at every moment potentially you could put it on. It's just a matter of time until you'll put it on. It's not an hefsek at all. But if there's a moment that you can't put on your tefillin, so now here your intention to put it back on is not going to be effective. You have been disconnected of the first act of the mitzvah that you've done. You've put yourself in a place that you can't do the act of this mitzvah. So the bracha that you made on the first act of the mitzvah will not carry over to when you put the tefillin back on. In between, you were in a place that you were totally removed of this mitzvah. So therefore you have to make a new bracha. So as far as the physical tefillin being on you and the bracha that you make on that, and the hefsek that happens when you take off your tefillin. So here it's very simple and clear that first of all you have to look at the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah. As long as it's on you, so the tefillin is on you, the mitzvah continues. There's no hefsek here, regardless if your mind is on the tefillin or not. Over here, it's the physical tefillin that's there. The mitzvah is continuing. Even when you take it off, the point over here is we have to examine, are you really disconnected of the first act of the mitzvah that you did? And that explains the halacha of Hesach Hadas regarding tefillin. The Rebbe will later contrast this to Limud HaTorah, why this doesn't apply as well to Limud HaTorah, which is one of the question that the Rebbe asked over here. Why don't we say the same concept by Limud HaTorah? If you stop learning and you're in a place where you're not allowed to learn, so we should apply the exact same logic that the Rebbe just said over here. The Rebbe will explain soon why Limud HaTorah is different. But before that, the Rebbe now goes to the other aspect of the halacha of Hesach Hadas regarding tefillin, which will also be relevant to understanding how it works regarding Limud HaTorah. What was the other aspect of Hesach Hadas regarding tefillin? The Rebbe's question was, why is it that although you're not allowed to take your mind off the tefillin, yet what's considered to be taking your mind off of tefillin? Only if you're acting with Chelek and Kalas Reish. Why is it only Chelek and Kalas Reish? If we're learning from the tzitz that you shouldn't be taking your mind off the tefillin. So the Rebbe explains that here comes in the other aspect of the mitzvah. An integral part of the mitzvah is also the kavanah. The shibud alev hamayach. You're subjugating your mind and heart to the Eibishter. Move on. Shegam zet tzarich liya is kaleis kiyum mitzvah. This also has to be there the entire mitzvah. The fact that a person has the mitzvah, the fulfillment of the mitzvah, during the entire time that the presence of the tefillin is on his arm. So also the kavanah, the shibud hamayach va'alei, which is an integral part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah, also has to be there the entire time that the mitzvah is on the person. And this shibud hamayach va'alei, as the Rebbe will explain soon, and we see from what the Rebbe says soon, where does this shibud hamayach come from? From the tefillin. The tefillin that has the parashiyos inside, and what it says inside the parashiyos, and the Eibishter's names in the parashiyos, and that reminds a person of the Eibishter, and that brings about the shibud hamayach. So when we talk about not being Masiach Das from the tefillin, which we learn from the tzitz, which has the Eibishter's name in it, so that name of the Eibishter in the tefillin causes a person to remember the Eibishter, which is what the shibud hamayach is all about. So it's this aspect of the mitzvah that is the whole point here when we talk about the fact that you're not allowed to be Masiach Das because of the name of the Eibishter. The name of the Eibishter is the cause of this shibud hamayach v'halev that should be there constantly as a result of the Eibishter's name being on your arm and on your head. However, says the Rebbe, so although it has to be there the entire duration of the mitzvah, omnom, mikiven shebe'esa nocha. When he puts on the tefillin, The person put on the tefillin with that intention, that he's putting it on, and he's aware of the Eibishter's name that's in the tefillin, and he's subjugating his heart and mind to the Eibishter. At that point he stood with the proper awe and reverence of Hashem. The condition the person's in that follows afterwards. Stam meaning the person is not doing anything opposite of that original approach and attitude he had. Stam, later on he's wearing the tefillin and he may be occupied with whatever he's doing, but he's not particularly paying attention to the tefillin. It's just stam. So the person is Isaac, he's occupied. He's not literally thinking about this tefillin that has the Eibishter's name, and I'm subjugating my mind and heart to the Eibishter. The kavanah that the person had before will continue even later while he's wearing the tefillin. And the fact that the person is stam, he's in a situation of stam where he's doing what he's doing, is not going to be taking his mind away from the tefillin. That kavanah that you began with, that attitude that you began with, will continue with you, is there with you even if you're not actively and consciously thinking of it. That kavanah defines your whole entire experience while you're wearing the tefillin, whether you're consciously thinking about it or not. Where do you find this? Val derech lishma. An example for this is you found also regarding the halacha of lishma. When it comes to the halacha of writing a sefer Torah or writing a get, and the halacha is that it has to be written lishma with a certain concentration for a certain purpose. So here's this is a quote from the Alter Rebbe in Tanya. This is a halacha as well. She'ikra achana lishma la'akev u'betchilas halimud cholo. The kavanah of lishma is in the beginning, when you start. In the beginning, when you learn. The Alter Rebbe is talking also about learning Torah, to learn Torah lishma. And the Alter Rebbe says, that you write a get, you write a sefer Torah, there's a kavanah of lishma that you have to write the sefer Torah or the get for. As long as in the beginning, when you began writing, you write, you say that I'm going to write for the kedusha of the sefer Torah, or by a get, it has to be written for the intention for this woman and this man. So then you have the lishma in the beginning, the act that follows that original intention is going to define your action. It's the whole action is a hemshech of that kavanah you had in the beginning. It's the same thing also with the tefillin. When you put on the tefillin in the beginning with the kavanah of the awareness of the Eibishter's name in the tefillin, which brings about the shibud alev ha'mayach, so then that defines your whole continuation of your wearing of your tefillin, that it's all as a continuation of this attitude, of this approach, that I'm doing it for the Eibishter's sake, and I'm aware of this, what the tefillin is about. So now the Rebbe adds here, if the Alter Rebbe says this regarding the kavanah of lishma, it's even more so, we can understand this concept even more so regarding tefillin. Shehesach hadas hu b'kesher im shibud b'chlal v'stomi da'amayach v'alev. Here, wearing the tefillin and wearing the Eibishter's name of the tefillin, what does that bring about? It brings about a person a general bittul, a general subjugation to the Eibishter. Stomi, the whole mind and heart of a person is dedicated to this. We're not talking about the fact that a person has a requirement to concentrate and focus and do something for a specific purpose, like when you write a sefer Torah and a get. But we're talking about a general attitude of a person, that the awareness of the Eibishter's name that's on his heart, near his heart and on his head, brings a person into a mindset. A general mindset that I'm under this impression of the Eibishter's name on me, and therefore I subjugate my mind and heart. So how much more so you understand that general mindset in the beginning, even if you're not consciously thinking of it the entire duration of wearing a tefillin, but that's a mindset that continues into your entire action. It defines the whole entire experience that follows after that mindset in the beginning. So therefore, we understand that the main thing is in the beginning, the mindset the person has in the beginning. Now, chamu mikulam tzitz. Regarding the tzitz, so over here also, you have the Eibishter's name, and you have to constantly be aware of the Eibishter's name, but tzitz actually has a reason why there's a stringency here more than the writing of the Sefer Torah, and the get, and the tefillin, which we said is even more. Tefillin is there's a mindset in the beginning. So actually, by the tefillin, it's easier to understand why it continues. By the tefillin and the Sefer Torah, by writing a Sefer Torah, writing a get, it's a bigger chiddush that your kavanah of the Shema follows and continues into your action later. But the chomer of all of them, the Rebbe says, is the tzitz. The tzitz over here, what's the halacha actually by the tzitz? You're not supposed to take your mind off the tzitz constantly, literally, the entire time. Why is that? Why don't we say by the tzitz that the kavanah, the mindset you have in the beginning when you put on the tzitz, should continue and follow later? The shovel, the tefillin, the hesach hadas, kosher baskara shabem. We compare the two. Tzitz and tefillin is the same concept. It's the Eibishter's name that you have to be aware of, and therefore you can't take your mind off of it. So why don't we say that the same thing that your mindset in the beginning works? Hare in yanai u'pu'ulasai. So you have to look at what you're accomplishing through the tzitz. Remembering the Eibishter's name and wearing the tzitz and remembering the Eibishter's name is to accomplish what? In yanai u'pu'ulasai lechaper or leratzais aladam v'alachelev shekarva v'chulu. The blood or the fats of the carbon that were not brought properly, and the tzitz is coming to be mechaper on that. That's a carbon mesuyim. Bizman mesuyim, a specific carbon in a specific time that the tzitz that's being worn then has to be michaper on that. So the tzitz, you can't rely on the mindset that you had in the beginning. When it comes to the tefillin, the idea of the tefillin is that you're aware of the Eibishter's name, and it brings a person to a general mindset of shibud hamayach v'alev. That general mindset is what we want to bring in the person. That's the integral part of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. To the person should have the shibud hamayach v'alev, and that's what it is. And that mindset naturally continues. Everything that happens afterwards is under that influence of that mindset. By the tzitz, though, the remembrance of the Eibishter's name, the wearing of the tzitz, and the awareness of the Eibishter's name has to have a specific effect later while you're actually wearing the tzitz. And there's a carbon being brought and there was something not done properly with this carbon, right then the tzitz has to have a power to have the effect to be mechaper. In order for it to have the power then to be mechaper, you can't rely on a mindset from before. Even if the mindset continues, but that's not enough. You have to actually have your awareness of the tzitz and of the Eibishter's name right then in order to be mechaper for this carbon. So therefore by the tzitz, it will be different. It will require more of a mindset of the person. And not only the mindset in the beginning, but more of an awareness b'shas ma'aseh in order for the kapara to take effect. Aval. So this is all the explanation of why a person doesn't actually have to have the constant conscious awareness while he wears the tefillin. So on one end we're comparing it to the tzitz, yet at the same time what the effect of the tzitz is supposed to be explains why the tzitz actually requires that awareness every moment, not like by the tefillin. The shibud hamayach alev of the tefillin in the beginning continues. Avol k'sha'ayimid b'schoy k'kalas roish nikra hesach hadas b'tefillin. When a person is chayk and kalas roish, is this frivolous behavior, so over here, this will be hesach hadas of the tefillin. So now your original mindset can't continue into your wearing the tefillin later. Why not? Ki hu heipach shlilas hakavana anal. Because this is negating. This is the opposite of your original mindset. Umevatl pulas shibad alev v'chulu. So therefore, it breaks that original mindset that he had when he put on the tefillin. V'oz nifsek hashechusay lemitzvas tefillin v'hav hesach hadas. So this interrupts, this breaks your connection to this aspect of the mitzvah, the shibud alev hamayach, and therefore this constitutes a hesach hadas. So the fact that only kalas roish and schoik is an hesach hadas is not because that's the definition, that's the requirement of not being masiach das. No. The requirement of not being masiach das is to actually have the mindset of shibud alev hamayach that comes from the Eibishter's name being on you. Elamai, that requirement you won't be required to actually think that every moment consciously, because the mindset in the beginning will automatically continue. But the moment you have an opposite kavanah of schoik and kalas roish, it'll break that mindset. And therefore now you don't have that original mindset to continue. That's the pshat when you get to the hesach hadas while a person's wearing his tefillin. So we have here the clarity of the pshat of hesach hadas, both b'nigeya to the bracha, what's considered to be a hesach hadas when a person takes off his tefillin, And also the Hesach Hadas beneged to wearing a tefillin. So we see over here that the concept of Hesach Hadas isn't to be taken literally, that your mind has to be on the tefillin constantly. When you talk about the action of the mitzvah being on you, so then the main thing you have to look at is the tefillin on you, so you're connected to it? Is it off you? Are you still connected to it? It's the same thing also. The concept of Hesach Hadas means, am I still connected to this mitzvah? That's the general point we get over here. And in each place we're applying it accordingly. By the actual tefillin being on you, we apply it regarding the actual tefillin when you take it off, when you go to a place where you're not allowed to put on tefillin. When it comes to the shibud aleva mayach, so over here, the way we define whether you're still connected to this shibud aleva mayach is different. Over here we go according to the mindset of the person that he began with. And that mindset would automatically continue unless you have a befedish opposite kavana that undoes it. So these are the points over here that are relevant now, that the Rebbe applies when it comes to Limud HaTorah. Similar, but again, to Limud HaTorah, the way we define Hesach Hadas of Limud HaTorah is not going to just literally be if a person stops learning or if a person plans not to learn. There's something deeper over here that we can understand from the way we just defined Hesach Hadas regarding Limud HaTorah as well. Let's see. Hinei Admar Azakim maybe beis deis le'inyan hefsek ben birchas HaTorah l'schalas halimud. So, to understand a certain special connection that a person has to his learning, even when he doesn't learn, the Rebbe brings up one more halacha here that the Alter Rebbe says regarding learning Torah. If a person made an interruption between the bracha and the beginning of his learning, there's an opinion that you don't have to learn Torah immediately after you make the bracha. Unlike other mitzvahs, usually you make a birchas mitzvah, you have to fulfill your mitzvah immediately afterwards. Even if you made an interruption between the bracha and his learning, this halacha is as if, the halacha here would be as if you made a hefsek in the middle of your learning. If you make a hefsek in the middle of your learning, so we already said before that you don't have to make a new bracha. So this opinion says the same as also if you made a hefsek between your bracha and the beginning of your learning. We don't compare this to birchas mitzvahs where if you make a break in between you have to make a new bracha. Talmud Torah is different. Why? You have a constant obligation to learn Torah. So therefore, if you make a bracha between you make a hefsek that is between the bracha and the learning, it's not considered to be a break. Even in that time of this interruption, you're obligated to learn. You're still connected to your learning. There's an opinion that argues on this, and Alter Rebbe says you should be chayshish, and therefore you should not make a break between the bracha and your learning. So before the Rebbe gets to the point that he wants to make, the Rebbe will clarify what's this v'yesh chelkin. Does this yesh chelkin argue with the whole premise of the first opinion? Does the yesh chelkin say that chiyuv that you have to learn Torah is not considered to be a connection to your learning? And therefore they say you must make the bracha right away. They argue with the whole premise of the first opinion. So the Rebbe says no. In order not to intensify the argument here, so we can say that Deya Beis, the second opinion, lepligal etzem asvara, is that doesn't argue on the premise of what the first opinion said. The mitzat shetamid Torah chayiv lasik batamid. Since Torah is something that a person is obligated to learn constantly, yesh la adam shaychus le Torah gam b'shosha eina yisik ba. You're connected to the Torah even while you're not learning it. The very chiyuv, the constant chiyuv, this is the only mitzvah that there's a constant chiyuv, that itself, and I shouldn't really say the only mitzvah, there are certain mitzvahs tmidius, but this mitzvah, unlike most of the mitzvahs, that, at least all the mitzvahs that you make a bracha on, that it's a mitzvah that you do in a specific time, and it's not a constant mitzvah, this is a constant obligation to learn Torah. So this concept, even the second opinion agrees that because of this you have a special connection to it, even between the bracha and the learning, and you didn't begin learning yet, you're connected to your Torah. Or pligarak, the only reason this opinion argues that you can't make a break between the bracha and the learning, maybe for the beginning of the learning, in order for the bracha to have where to be chal, where to take effect, you have to actually do the act of the mitzvah right away. But as far as the person's connection to the mitzvah, even the second opinion agrees that because the constant obligation, the person is always connected to the mitzvah of limud HaTorah. Ulachein, and therefore says the Rebbe, lekula alma ein tzarech das bepoil b'meshach hayom shelo yikare hefsek v'hesach hadas. So now we come back to the concept of hesach hadas. What did we see from what we learned before in the Sikha? Hesach hadas doesn't mean that I'm consciously thinking about something, or hesach hadas doesn't only mean when I'm actually planning on doing something, but it's more subtle. The concept of hesach hadas we saw before is as long as I still have a connection to something, so it's not hesach hadas. That's not called hesach hadas. As we saw before, beniged to the halacha of tefillin, if a person could put it back on, so that's not called hesach hadas. Over here, when we apply this concept to Torah, it's going to come out different. By Torah, because a person always has a connection to Torah, so therefore, even if a person is not consciously and actively thinking about the Torah, even when he's not learning, however, there's no hesach hadas. The very fact that this is a unique mitzvah, that a person has a constant obligation to learn Torah, this is what connects a person to the mitzvah all the time. All the time. So this explains the difference now between tefillin and Talmud Torah. So by tefillin we said that if a person takes off his tefillin and he goes in a place where he's not allowed to put on the tefillin, so it's a hefsek. Your connection to the mitzvah is interrupted. But Torah is different. By Torah, even if you enter into a place where you're not allowed to learn Torah, you're not allowed to learn Torah because really the obligation is still there, which means your connection to the Torah is still there. There's like a lion that's blocking your access, your ability to actually learn. But it's not that it's a place where there's an Isser and therefore you're not connected anymore. By tefillin, there l'chatchila is no obligation to wear tefillin every moment. So you walk into a place where you're not allowed to put on tefillin, your connection to tefillin is right now completely interrupted. But if I have the obligation on me constantly, even the moment that I'm in a place that I'm not allowed to learn tefillin, I still have that obligation right this moment, but I'm not allowed to learn, so that's like just a blockage, an external blockage is not allowing me to actually fulfill my obligation. So I'm still connected to the Torah. The das that the person has in mind that is going to continue to learn later, that's enough that the das that he has in the beginning, he made the brach in the beginning and he had the das to learn Torah. He began learning Torah. That das will continue as well. Which is also connected to the point, which is based on the point that the Rebbe said before regarding the hesach hadas by the tefillin, the mindset that you had in the beginning, even if you're not consciously thinking about the tefillin later, but that mindset continues. Similar over here, but a bit different. Over here as well, the beginning, a person made a bracha on the Torah, so because the person has a constant obligation to learn Torah, so that original bracha will continue with you even afterwards, even though you went through a time period where you were not allowed to learn Torah. However, you're still presently connected to the Torah. So your bracha from the beginning could continue to the Torah that you're going to learn later as well. However, there's one exception here. If a person goes to sleep and it's a permanent sleep, or someone that's not accustomed to learning. So he doesn't have, when he stops learning, he occasionally learns and he completely goes away from his learning, totally takes his mind off of it and he gets occupied in something opposite and away from the learning. Here the person completely broke away from his learning. Here the person is going to have to make a bracha again, according to the first opinion that Alter Rebbe said in Shulchan Aruch, that it's not like Birchas HaShachar. So, as the Rebbe explains in the Ha'ara, this is connected to the point that we said regarding tefillin. Although we said by tefillin that your mindset in the beginning when you put on the Shibud Alev HaMayach continues on into the whole time that you're wearing your tefillin, but if the Schaik V'Kalis Reish, so that mindset gets broken. That mindset has now something that's opposite, that's going against your original mindset, so it can't continue. Your connection of your Shibud HaMayach V'Alev can't continue. Similar over here. We're also saying that the original bracha the person made and his connection to the Torah continues even if his mind is not consciously on the Torah right now. and he's involved in something else, or he's even in a place where he can't learn the tefillin, but that connection to the Torah continues because you still have the obligation. Except if a person is doing something which is going against that obligation he has, or is like breaking off from that obligation he has, a permanent sleep, or a person that's not accustomed to learning and he's consciously taking himself away from learning, he doesn't have his mindset to continue back to learning. He just removes himself completely from his learning, although he has that obligation, but he completely removed himself from the learning. So you went and did something which is against and away from that learning, so you broke yourself off actively, so then you're going to have to make a new bracha. So this is similar to the way it was, the way the Hezbollah, the Rebbe said, by the tefillin. So now that we have the understanding of the mitzvah of limud HaTorah, the bracha that you make in the beginning of the day, and how that bracha helps with the duration of the day. It's nimshach and there's no hefsek over here, so let's apply that back to the women. And why the Alter Rebbe brings the reason that women are chayiv to make a bracha, because they have to learn their halachas. The Alter Rebbe brings the reason that the women make the bracha of birchas HaTorah. They're obligated to learn Torah, to know their mitzvahs, and to be careful of loisesa. Why is Alter Rebbe bringing this reason? And why is it not enough, the reason that it says in the Gemara, that the very act of learning Torah, whether it's a mitzvah or an obligation or not, necessitates a bracha? The reason is, if not for this explanation that they have a constant obligation of learning, even if that would be a good enough of an explanation, that women have to make a birchas HaTorah as an introduction for their learning. As we said before, you learn it out from Shem Hashem Ekra, or as the Alter Rebbe says, that the very act of learning Torah, you have to make a bracha for the simcha that the Eibishter gave you, this Torah. The halacha should have been that for every time they learn Torah, Shem Hashem Ekra, they should have to make a bracha then. The act of limud Torah every time necessitates a bracha. That would be the halacha by a woman if that's the only reason that they're chayiv to make a bracha. This is a huge chiddush. It doesn't say such a thing anywhere, that the women have to make a bracha for the very act of learning every single time they learn. So therefore the Alter Rebbe explains that they're obligated to learn. Besides the very act of learning, they're also obligated to learn. They have a mitzvah to learn in order to know how to do their mitzvahs. The kavanasai, what the Alter Rebbe is saying with this is, just like men make one bracha a day, as we explained, one bracha in the beginning of the day will carry you throughout the day because you're always connected to that Torah, as long as you don't actively break yourself away from the Torah. But that kavan in the beginning, that bracha in the beginning, continues throughout. Al derech zeh b'noshim. So here the Alter Rebbe is saying that we could apply the same reasoning by women. And from these mitzvahs, there are things that they're obligated every single day, all day they have these chiyuvim. So there's never a moment in the day that they don't have an obligation to learn Torah, to know their mitzvahs. It comes out that women also have the obligation to learn Torah all day. So therefore women also make one bracha in the morning, one bracha in the beginning of the day, and that bracha carries them through the entire day. With any hafsik they make in between, they're always connected to the Torah because they always have that chiyuv to learn Torah, to know their mitzvahs. So the Alter Rebbe is bringing this reason for the mitzvah to explain that the mitzvah of limud HaTorah, that is, that they're obligated to learn Torah, to explain how one bracha will work for the women for the entire day like it is by the men. So now the Rebbe finally comes back to the second opinion that was mentioned before, B'kitzer. The second opinion was that the bracha that we make once a day in the morning, the Chazal will mesaken this to be like the Birchas HaShachar. Just like Birchas HaShachar, you don't make that bracha every single time. Pekeh Chivrim, Malbish Harumim, Zeikev Kfufim. You don't make that bracha every time you get up. Once in the morning, and that bracha goes for the rest of the day. So Chazal established Talmud Torah as well, once in the morning, and that goes for the rest of the day. So the Rebbe now discusses this from that vantage point, from this opinion. Ach l'chayre, now seemingly, this whole hezbollah that we said here in the Sikha doesn't fit with this opinion. L'fi yadeya, according to the second opinion, shekein nagu, and the Alter Rebbe says we follow this opinion that regardless of what you do during the day, even if you go to sleep permanently, a long sleep, you don't make a new bracha. The mevarchim birchas hatayre pa'machas b'yoyim l'fi shebirchas hatayre ikebirchas hashachar shaletik noisrael pa'machas b'yoyim. That's the original design of this bracha. This is a bracha like birchas hashachar that's made only once a day in the morning. So if so, there's a completely different reason why it's made once a day. Nothing to do with the point that we said before, because the person's never interrupting, he's always connected, he always has a chiyuv to learn. None of that. It's simple. It's just, that's the way the takana was designed, that it's like the birchas hashachar in the morning. If so, our question comes back, tam birchas hatayre benashim shum shechayavis lilmod chol. So it's not necessary for the Alter Rebbe to bring this reason of the chiyuv of the women to learn Torah to explain the explanation of why the women make a bracha once a day doesn't need any explanation. It's simple. It's part of birchas hashachar. So the whole hezbollah in the Sikha only fits with the first opinion that the Alter Rebbe says that you make the bracha once in the morning, and then later in the day we have to start examining, is it a hefsik, is it not a hefsik? And the only reason it's not a hefsik is because you're constantly chayiv. According to the other opinion, none of that is relevant. It's just part of birchas hashachar. Avol ze einay. Says the Rebbe, it's not true. The hezbollah of the Sikha is true even according to the second opinion. Why is this? So the Rebbe explains. Let's take a look at birchas hashachar itself. Why taka is it that birchas hashachar is a bracha that you make once a day in the morning? So the Alter Rebbe says, birchas hashachar tiknu chachamim al seder ha'olam v'anagosai. These are brachas that we thank the Eibusher for the things that happen in the world. What people derive benefit from the world every single day. These are things that a person is nana every day and more than once a day. So Chazal were masakin that you don't make a bracha for this hana every single time you have this hana during the day. Once in the morning, you make the bracha for this hana, and that bracha goes on the entire day. That's the concept of why they established this for birchas hashachar. So what do we see here? The birchas hashachar niskenu al mashabriyas nenen b'chol yoimu b'tmidus. That the whole concept of birchas hashachar is because every day, on a constant basis, there's always these hanas that come up during the day. So they said, shetekif b'pam harishayna b'tchilas hayayim, that immediately, the first time, in the morning, yivarchu al hanasa. Don't wait until you have this hana, the second, third, or fourth time, sometime during the day. Make that bracha in the beginning, the first time you have that hana. Kagayin bircha zekif kefufim, that a person stands up. Shu inyan tmidi sheyeshne kol hayayim. This is something that's constant during the day. Umevarchim al zeh b'pam harishayna b'tchilas hayayim, and you make the bracha once in the beginning of the day. Avol, however, from this we know that ano is v'inyonim she'einam t'midiyim. If there are certain benefits and certain things that a person has in this world that are not constant, they're not daily. Afim yevoyu b'meshach hayayim b'derech alei pa'amachas hayaser. Even if this is something that will occasionally come up during the day, once or twice, and the Rebbe applies it back to what we're speaking about over here. The same would be true also, applying this back to women learning Torah. If we're not going to say this point, that women are obligated to learn Torah all the time because they have a chiyuv to know their mitzvahs, and this is constantly applicable all the time, right? So they're learning, if you're going to say that they're learning Torah during the day is not a constant thing, occasionally, if it comes up, so certain times, if they decide, they could learn. They want to learn. So the Eibusher gave them the Torah too, and they could take the Torah and learn it occasionally. If that's how we're going to look at their limud Torah, so this whole premise of this opinion, that we're including birchas Torah and birchas hashachar, wouldn't work by the women either. So even according to this opinion, that the concept of birchas Torah once a day in the morning is because it's part of birchas hashachar, what's the basis of that? The basis of that is that birchas Torah is a constant thing that's daily and comes up all the time during the day. And that's only true by the men that have a constant chiyuv to learn Torah, but not by the women. If we're just going to say that a woman on her own could choose and go to pick up a sefer to learn Torah. So therefore the point that we said here in the Sikha, that the Alter Rebbe is bringing this inyan, that women do have the obligation all the time to learn Torah. That's very relevant even according to the second opinion, explaining why even for women, Birchas HaTorah is part of Birchas HaShachar. So even women have a constant obligation to learn Torah like the men. And that itself is taka the explanation of this second opinion, why Limud HaTorah is part of Birchas HaShachar. Birchas HaShachar is designed for the daily and constant benefits that a person has. So therefore the only reason that by women this is also true regarding Birchas HaTorah is because women also have the obligation to learn Torah all the time. So we see from this sikha to what extent the obligation of women is to learn Torah. The previous sikha that we learned in Parshas Va'eschanan, the Rebbe also made the point very strongly that although they're only learning a Torah for another purpose, to do a mitzvah, to know how to do their mitzvahs, but nevertheless they have the actual value and all the milas that come along with learning Torah itself. Here the Rebbe is going a step further, and the Rebbe is saying that this constant connection that a Yid has to Torah, the constant chiyuv that a person has to learn Torah non-stop, applies to women as well, to some extent at least, enough to the extent that they make the bracha once a day and they never masir das from the Torah. It continues throughout the entire day because of their mitzvahs that they have to fulfill. So this is the hashlama of this inyan of the Birchas HaTorah b'chlal, and especially as it applies to women.